Hi, Darren here, and in this session, we're going to explore something really quite fascinating, a new way of thinking about health and well-being and the pursuit of it. So let me just start by sharing my screen with you, and we'll kick it off. There we go. All right, so to kick it off, I actually have a couple of quiz questions that I would like to reflect on. So here are the quiz questions to start. What percentage of the human body, and specifically your human body, is water? And second question is, how much water should you drink each day to replace the fluid that you lose? And now we're all losing fluid. You would be well aware of this. When we go to the bathroom, we're losing fluid. We sweat, we lose fluid in that way. If you breathe on a glass or mirror, you'll actually see that there's moisture in our air that we expire. So we're losing fluid all the time. So how much should you be drinking a day to replace that fluid? Well, here we go. The answers are the following. The average adult male is probably around about 60% fluid. Females are a little bit less, but kids are a whole lot more. And you'll notice that I actually asked the question, how much of your body is water? And the reality is that as you age, you actually start to get less and less fluid in your body. This is why we literally, and I hate the fact that when you look at the guidelines here, they say, especially over the age of 50, and I'm thinking, I feel targeted when people say this. But certainly as we get older, we know that our fluid component of our body starts to decrease, and we start to see the effects of that. It looks like we shrivel up a little bit. We see it in our skin. So roughly, let's run with 60% of most people, the average adult body is water. And in terms of how much fluid we should be consuming, well, it's around about 2.5 litres a day for males, around about 2 litres for females. So that's sort of 8 to 10 glasses. And you would have heard about this lots. And what that basically is doing is replacing the fluid that we're excreting through these various channels that I mentioned to you before. However, 8 to 10 glasses, losing that much fluid a day, we can actually do a whole lot better than that. For example, when we exercise in the heat. Now, this is a photo here of Fenella Langridge, and she is a British triathlete. And in 2022, she was in the top 10 of the Hawaiian Ironman triathlons. So amazing event. If you're ever bored and you need something to do with your time, this will take up plenty of it. And you have to be probably slightly crazy to do it. But what it involves, it's a 3.8 kilometre swim, 180 kilometre cycle, and then a marathon run, 42 kilometres, to finish it off because you haven't done enough already before that. And so really arduous event, but it happens in Hawaii and you ride through lava fields. So it's humid, it's hot, you're doing exhaustive exercise. And what you'd anticipate is that fluid losses can be really, really high, and they are. In fact, scientists actually tracked to see how much fluid Fenella was losing throughout the course of the event. And they found that it was around about 1.1 litres per hour. The event took her 9 hours-ish. So if you do the sums, 9 times 1.1 is 9.9 litres. So let's say 10 litres of fluid that she had lost throughout the course of the event. Now, clearly she had to be replacing that, so she was consuming fluid as she went. But here's the fascinating concept here, is that Fenella weighs about 56 kilograms. So almost a fifth of her body, almost, it's actually about 18% of her body mass had been replaced, right? It had been excreted and then replaced with new stuff over the course of that 9-hour period. So here's this idea that 20%, almost 20% turnover during the course of that event. So, when Fenella stood on the start line, right, she was made of this, and then 9 hours later at the end of this event, 20% almost of what she was made of had actually been renewed, replaced. Now, we can understand that, we see that fluid is being lost and fluid is coming in. But what we actually are now discovering, and scientists are uncovering, is that this is actually happening with a whole range of other body parts as well, or components of what makes us up. Here's a case in point. If I actually show you this example here of a sorry, I'll come back to that one, of your fingers. And I ask you the question, how long have you had those fingernails for? And, and you look at those and you think, oh, well, they've been there for a long time. They look much the same. But the truth is that our fingernails are constantly refreshing and replenishing themselves. They're growing out and we're getting new ones in a sense. And I could say the same thing about your skin. So how long have you had that skin for? Well, we actually know that your skin is shedding, all right? And you're always getting new layers of skin coming to the surface and doing battle with the elements. And so in a sense, we're actually getting, even though they look the same and they're same in structure and function, what they're actually made up of, our fingernails, our skin, is changing. It's being renewed. Our hair is the same. Our hair grows and then we have to cut it, or maybe we don't. We grow it longer. And so we're constantly getting this renewing of our hair. And what scientists have now stumbled on is that it's not just the superficial parts of us. Yes, it's the water inside us. Yes, it's our skin, it's our fingernails, but it's even the deeper parts of us as well that are experiencing this renewal process. So, for example, we know that the muscles that are contained within your body, the material that makes them up, is being replenished around about every 4 or 5 months or so. And even the very deep parts of us, for example, our skeleton. We see a human skeleton and we think, oh, it's permanent and static, it's unchanging, we can tap it, it feels solid. But in a human, a live human body, this is once again in this constant state of renewal. Your skeleton, the bones that make you up, are actually being dismantled and then built back up again. They go through these what we call catabolic and anabolic processes. And so our bones, even our solid bones, are constantly being renewed. In fact, this published in Nature Medicine back in 2021, what these researchers were able to do was to quantify and see how much of ourselves is actually in this state of renewal constantly. And what they found is that we actually turn through around 4 million cells every second. So about 4 million cells are being dismantled and another 4 million cells are being created and built up to replace them. Right? This is 4 million, 8 million, 12 million, 16 million. You can see this is a massive turnaround. In fact, around about 80 grams of who we are, of the hard stuff, not the fluid stuff, but of the hard stuff that we're made up of, is renewed and replaced every day. And this tallies up to that every 18 months or so, you get a new you, right? The material that makes you up is completely renewed around about every 18 months. Fascinating. What it means is that we used to think of our human body as something like a statue, static and constant and unchanging. But what we realize now, it's a whole lot more like a river, right? We're constantly having things flow into us and then flow out of us. And what this river analogy does is help us to create a new paradigm for thinking about health and well-being, both physically, but also mentally as well. So, for example, my brother has a PhD in ecology, and he's a marine biologist. And in the ecology world, when they talk about the health of a river, right, and we are a river, but when they talk about the health of a river, they talk about its connectedness, what's flowing into it and how rapidly it's flowing. We know if good things are flowing into that river, that the river, the river is more likely to be healthy. Whereas if you have toxins flowing into it, it's more likely to be unhealthy and toxic. In the same way as when water flows, when that river flows, then it's more likely to be healthy. And like when water's flowing in a mountain stream, it's more likely to be safe to drink. And so what we know is that when you get that connection between the right kind of things flowing in and the right rate of flow, that's when a river is considered to be connected. That's when it's healthy. When things go wrong with what's flowing in or what's flowing out, that's when it starts to become toxic, when it becomes less healthy. So for example, when a river has not enough flowing into it and too much flowing out, it will dry up, like the illustration here. Or the converse, if you actually have too much flowing in, but it never flows out, like the Dead Sea, then it actually becomes uninhabitable to life as well. Hence its name, the Dead Sea. And so this whole idea of balancing, the right kind of things flowing in and the right kind of rate of flow out is really critical for our health and well-being too. And clearly, what it speaks to, using this river analogy, is that what we allow to flow in, particularly we're talking about nutrition here, and then how rapidly we allow that to flow through. We're talking about physical activity here, right? These two staples of health and well-being. We know that they're really important as we understand and discover the body as more of a river and not a statue. And of course, the same thing applies to our mental health. What we allow to flow into our brains, applying this river analogy, and then what we allow to flow out and leave can have a big impact on how the health and the happiness of this region of our body will be. And there's one last little really fascinating implication of this as well, because researchers are starting to ask the question, well, you know what, if the material that makes you up is replaced every 18 months or so, well, then where are you? Where is the entity, the identity that is you? Where is Darren? I'm here. I've been here for a long time. I feel the same. And yet the physical material that makes me up is being replenished, every 18 months or so. Right? It changes the way that we think about, a whole range of sort of esoteric questions. And so, I will say that I find this whole idea of a river analogy quite insightful, but also a little bit hopeful as well. The idea that you are constantly renewing. You have the opportunity to affect change depending on what you allow to flow in and how you allow it to flow through. It influences both your physical and your mental health. And so with that thought that you are a river more than a statue, we have some reflection questions that we'd love you to ponder. But I hope that the idea that you're only ever 18 months old is really quite uplifting for you and gives you some hope.